great to have you here. As you probably know, this webinar is part of our series dedicated entirely to maritime cybersecurity. So stick around because in the coming weeks, there's plenty more to dive into. So a few housekeeping rules before we start. The session is being recorded, so if you're not comfortable with that, feel free to leave the session now. I'm going to gently ask everybody to keep your microphone muted throughout the session and also switch off your camera, please. That will help us preserve some bandwidth and ensure a smooth experience for everyone. If you have questions, please drop them into the chat. We'll gather them and go through everything at the end of the presentation. So let's get started. Today's webinar is Maritime Cyber Threats Are Rising and Are We Ready? And today's speakers are Professor Dr. Stefan McCombie. He's a leading expert in Maritime IT Security. He holds a PhD in computer science from Macquarie University, and he has also lectured on cybersecurity and digital forensics over a number of years at Macquarie University, Charles Sturt University, and the National University of Singapore, until he was bribed to join NHL Stenden in the Netherlands with, as rumor goes, the apartment with the best view on the Elfstedentocht. He's joined by Dr. Jeroen Pijpker, who is the program manager and the manager of the MITS research group, and MITS stands for Maritime IT Security at NHL Stenden in the Netherlands. Their research spans maritime cyber threats, cybercrime, digital forensics, and cyber conflict, but also forms the basis of for me, very interesting little database called the Maritime Cyber Attack Database, worth the visit. Stefan, Jeroen, the ship is yours.
Thanks, Yves. I'll just share my screen. Okay, can you see my slides and hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Awesome. Okay, great. So as Yves mentioned, we're a research group out of NHL Stenden in the north of the Netherlands called MITS, Maritime IT Security Research Group. Just a little bit of background about us in terms of the group itself. We based in a number of different places in Friesland and in Drenthe and Groningen in the north of the Netherlands. Often I talk to some of my Australian friends and they have no idea that there's anywhere other than Amsterdam in the Netherlands, so we always show this. We also very luckily have a maritime academy based on Terschelling, which is a fantastic place, and you'll see a bit about what we do there with our maritime students using the facilities there. Here's some nice photos of it on a nice sunny day. It's a pretty great spot. We were there this week and we're back next week, so we spent a lot of time there, even though we most of us work on the mainland. So just a bit about me. As Yves mentioned, worked in cybersecurity for quite a while. Over 25 years, I think I worked it out to be. Started off in law enforcement, was a detective working on computer crime cases, we used to call them back in those days, and have ended up working for IBM, looking at incident response, basically running a team that did the incident response for Australia and New Zealand for all of IBM, for all of IBM's customers, which was telcos, airlines, banks, you name it, and really grew really interested in understanding more about the sort of stuff we were seeing in our operations center in our SOC, and ended up doing my PhD, going back to university, doing my PhD, and actually did it on Russian groups that target Australian banks at the time. So that was really interesting, and all that interesting work looking at what goes on in Russia has become very much more relevant in terms of geopolitics in recent times. So that was quite useful, but always been very focused on understanding the threats. And with that, I might just throw to Jeroen just to introduce himself a little bit more as well.
Yeah, so I'm Jeroen Pijpker. My background is more in certified ethical hacking. I'm also lecturing that. I have been working for NHL Stenden for more than 15 years, and I really like to do research on maritime cybersecurity, doing research on honeynets, honeypots, but also I've done research about botnets, and I'm also working and doing my PhD at the University of Groningen, and hope to finish that within a year, hopefully. So, back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Jeroen. So yeah, Jeroen's multi-skilled, and he'll talk more about his project, the Ship Honeynet project, shortly. So the research group's been around for 4 years, started in September 2021, and really it was about bringing different skills together. You know, you've heard I'm sort of in that law enforcement, computer science, cyber forensics sort of side. Jeroen's ethical hacker and has done a lot of stuff. OT stuff, like actually looking at electronics and things in regard to various types of attacks. But also within our group, we've got Martin Muttendam, who's a ship's captain of 20 years experience, spent 30 years at sea, who's an instructor. Rob Lovers, who's has done his master's in what we call serious gaming, which is about building simulations for business purposes. So we really sort of combine those different skills within the team, but we also leverage the wider university as well. As I mentioned, we've got a maritime academy, so we teach maritime officers, we teach maritime technical people, and we also teach ship designers. So we've got a lot of different connections in with the maritime sector, and even beyond our group, we've got what we call cyber safety, who focus on human factors in cybersecurity. That to me, that's really important, particularly in the maritime sector, and you'll sort of see how that's reflected in our work. So no great surprises probably to people here. The maritime transportation system is a very complex system of systems, and that's why I suppose it's interesting for us to do research in this area, because a lot of knock-on effects in terms of incidents. And I'll talk about some cases in a while where you sort of see that effect, where an attack in one place impacts a lot of other places. So it's really important to understand that internetworking of different parts of the MTS, and we look at the whole MTS, not just ships, not just ports, but all the other supporting things, shipbuilding, all sorts of rail connections to ports, that sort of thing. So try and understand the total picture. Ships, in a lot of ways, are like a floating factory. They've got lots of OT and IT systems, but there's some things that are very specific in the maritime, and that's something we do a lot of work on. The ports are the same. They get quite a mix, quite a blend. And in both environments, there isn't the segmentation that perhaps we'd think in terms of those systems. Often they're very flat networks. So they're really interesting areas to work in for us. So just to start with, what makes the maritime industry so vulnerable, and maybe this won't be too surprising to those that work in the area. Obviously we've got very old equipment. It's not maintained because of the way ships operate, both in terms of budget and the time they actually have access to the system. So they're poorly maintained. Cybersecurity maturity is quite low in the industry, and there just isn't it. They just haven't had the experience, so they don't necessarily. If you look at it in the banking environment, or in government, or in software companies, there's a lot of focus on these types of issues. That's not the case in maritime. So they're really trying to catch up. At the same time, there's really serious threat actors targeting the maritime sector, both criminal groups and state-sponsored groups, and we'll talk more about that in a second. So one of the first things we did as part of setting up the group is we talked to some people in the maritime sector, particularly here in the Netherlands. And the first thing they were sort of saying to us was, so how big a problem is it? And I had read some materials on incidents, but there wasn't anything particularly comprehensive. I think the best at the time was like they might have 40 odd incidents they listed. So we thought, okay, this is a good project for us. We can build a collection, do some security awareness, so people know more about what's actually happening in terms of maritime cyber attacks. Give them some detail if they want to do research on it. Just give them an idea of what's in the public space. Obviously, there's lots of stuff happening we don't know about in the public space. Collect that together. And so we built this MCAD, Maritime Cyber Attack Database. And it's actually been successful in ways I never really imagined. I was at a conference in Florida, and I was talking to a guy from the US Naval Academy in Annapolis. And he said, "Oh, you guys are the MCAD guys. We use that for the officer cadets in Annapolis." I just about fell off my chair because I just in my mind I thought US Navy, they're going to have the best intelligence on this sort of stuff. But the thing that we had that they don't have is the fact that it's all in public sources. So it's so much easier to use than classified information that might be available somewhere to certain people. So and that's been an advantage. I know I talked to some guys from Lloyd's of London. They use it in terms of their looking at the sort of risk profile of the maritime sector. Also, the recap in Singapore, they have an intelligence officer there who they send information out to all those Southeast Asian countries, plus a couple of, plus the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, a couple of others around piracy. So they also use it as well. So it's been surprisingly adopted around, and I think because it's all public source stuff. So we've got about 440 incidents in it now, so it's actually quite good. This is just what the web page looks like, but and basically you can sort of see the design. We're basically trying to make it very graphically sort of interactive, where you can click on the location where something happened. We've actually got apps available for Android and for Apple mobile devices. And you can see there just an example. We can click on an incident. This one's in Ternausen, not too far from Antwerp, I think. Just shows the detail of what happened, if there's all the references involved, any detail that we can find available. So, and basically, you can click on other places. Another one, this is an incident in Denmark, a ransomware attack, and there's lots of those, I can assure you. So this is sort of how it's set up. It's really trying to be pretty easy to use, and you don't have to, it doesn't cost anything to download, doesn't cost anything to register. So it's really out there. It's really something we're doing as a support for awareness in the wider community. So just in terms of, if we look at the totality, and obviously you've got to be careful because again, it's only public source incidents. There's been a massive increase. I think we had one in 2001. You can see in this graph here, and it's gone up to to over 80 in 2023. It dropped slightly in 2024, but and 2025 you have to ignore because obviously that's only up to July. So the full year hasn't been looked at yet. So once we've done that, we'll have a bit of a better picture of where it's dropped anymore. But you can see how it's gone well above the sort of 60 mark. And so these incidents are growing. And what we try and do is we are always looking back to see if new incidents are found that happened in the past. So it's not just a matter of what's in the press today, but it's also information about old incidents. An example was, I think it was in 2016, I thought 2017, there was an incident involving a ship coming into New York Harbour, and the US Coast Guard had to board it because they had a cyber attack on the bridge. And there was an alert put out by the US Coast Guard about this had happened, and it was a risk to other vessels. Didn't have a lot of detail on what happened, so we had it in our database. But then later on, the US Coast Guard commandant for the East Coast spoke at a conference and talked about the detail and talked about actually what the malware was and what happened. So there is an opportunity for us to actually update old incidents to get when that's more information becomes available. So it's just more useful. And as those who work in cybersecurity would appreciate that, you find out bits and pieces along the way. And sometimes it's a long time till there's a more comprehensive information available. So in terms of the breakdown, as I mentioned, ransomware is a huge part of it. We have a lot of stuff in the sort of navigation area, AIS spoofing, GPS jamming, going dark. But yeah, as you can see, ransomware is huge. I mean, it's huge across other industries as well, but it's and that's what's really grown that number a lot. If you look in terms of some of the victims, you can see obviously vessels are impacted by those sort of navigational events. You can sort of see there the GPS jamming, the spoofing, AI spoofing, the GPS spoofing, and other those sort of attacks are big in vessels. When we talk about shipping companies, we're talking about lots of ransomware, ports, lots of ransomware, but also incidents involving DDoS attacks. And I'll talk more about There's been a whole series of DDoS attacks against ports in Netherlands and Belgium of late. But it's the tip of the iceberg. So basically, if we look at what we've got, it's a great source of information. But we're really not seeing. There's categories of instances where they're not reported, either because the victims don't realise they've been compromised, the victims know they've been compromised but haven't made it public, or it's been dealt with by the government and they haven't made it public. So there is a big gap in that, but still a very useful source of information. 440 incidents, and it's useful for us because we can use it in our other research, which I'll talk about in a second. So the interesting thing too is you can actually, a lot of attacks have been attributed by various people, and basically a lot of like ransomware groups, for instance, are very closely tracked. And if we look at the ones where we know who the threat actor or what country the threat actor came from, was Russia is by far the biggest. There with well over 50% of the incidents originate from Russia, and there's two reasons for that. One is that you have Russia is a haven for cybercrime groups, and has been. That's I did my PhD on that. Is a haven for cybercrime groups and organised crime, and it has long been. And those ransomware groups, a lot of them are based out of Russia, and that's why that drives that. The second part of it is the geopolitical bit, in terms of the invasion of Ukraine, the tension between Russia and NATO and the West. So that's all played out by people like the GRU, the Russian intelligence, military intelligence organization, and other intelligence organizations. So that's why they're so big. China, obviously, there's a lot of stuff happening around Taiwan, the South China Sea. So in a lot of ways, when you look at what's happening in geopolitics, it tells you a lot about what's happening in maritime cybersecurity. But there's all sorts of the US are involved. They also use cyber as a way of doing attacks against. There's a case of it, I don't know if we've got it in our slides, but a case where they took out an Iranian spy vessel with a cyber attack. So it's a capability most countries have. Some use it a lot. People like North Korea, even though they're quite small, they've been involved in quite a few against the South Koreans and Japanese and other countries. So if we look at the sort of attack methods by country when we are identified, we can see that your ransomware is a huge thing that the Russians do. North Korea don't do ransomware attacks, but they do lots of jamming, lots of attacks against navigation. And China are a bit of a range of different things. So it's interesting if we can break it down when we look at the different countries. So we've been lucky with the different the information we've got has been covered in a lot of different newspapers. But again, because there was nothing else really out there. Someone might come along in a couple of years and come up with something better. But at the moment, it's good data. All the references are there, so I think it's useful, and so we've had good experience in terms of talking about it more broadly and getting more people to use it. So I'll just go through a couple of cases which I think are interesting. One was one from 2012, which it involved the USS Harry Truman. And basically what happened was there was an attack against a US Navy system, which was land-based, which was used for US Navy personnel when they had to do deployments. So it had a lot of important information, PII, information about where military people were located. So quite sensitive, and it was compromised, and that data was compromised. So the NCIS, which are the guys from the TV show, they did an investigation into it and said they worked out the traffic was actually coming from a US Navy ship in the Atlantic, the Harry S. Truman, so a big aircraft carrier. So the NCIS, being what they are, they flew on board, and they pretty quickly worked out who the actual person was behind the attacks. It was actually a sailor who was a network administrator on the ship. And basically, this is a nuclear aircraft carrier, so pretty sensitive. So just in the chat box, anybody want to guess what department of the aircraft carrier he was responsible for? So he looked after a particular department's network. What's a particular sensitive part of a nuclear aircraft carrier, do you think? We want to try and, in the chat box, keep it interactive a bit. I lost you all. No one wants to guess. Oh, here we go. Nuclear, exactly. Is responsible for the reactor. So pretty sensitive. And it's a great lesson in terms of maritime cybersecurity. You might think, oh, yeah, Navy ship's not going to have any threats on it because, they've got all this, supposedly the security. Gives that person an insider attack in a Navy environment, so it just shows you the possibilities, and you think in the maritime sector what happens. But they end up catching him. They did a sting, and a bit like our honey net, they did a sting on him, and basically he went for it, and they basically caught him on the keyboard, trying to compromise this setup system, and he was sent to jail. You'd all remember Maersk, of course, and it's very important in terms of cyber attacks because it basically, again, this was a Russian effort against the Ukrainians, which ended up hitting all sorts of people. Maersk in particular got hit because they had an office in Odessa, and because they had a flat network, basically spread across their entire network and took out a lot of things. But it was really sort of the first big attack against the maritime sector that was really got some people interested. So it was an important moment in terms of people recognising that, showed sort of decisions around, the security of their networks and this knock-on effect. Now, what I talked about before, this knock-on effect, that the thing wasn't so much that their computer systems were down, but it was the effect of that in terms of their operations and the effect of their operation problems on others. So as I mentioned, so geopolitics plays into this, and Iran and Israel both got pretty good capability when it comes to cyber. There was in 2020 the Iranian Revolutionary Guard did a cyber attack on a water purification plant in Israel.
الو
Yep.
واش خالي هنيا لا فواحد الكلاس مبغيتش ندير شي وحدين اخرين هنا في الكل حدا السيميلاتور.
I muted this, Steve, so you can go on.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So someone joined. I thought it was someone commenting on the Israel-Iran conflict. And basically what happened was the Israelis decided to respond to that attack, and they actually took out the main port of Iran and they actually attacked the OT system. So it showed that they're pretty advanced capability, shut it down for quite a while. So in a way, these cyber attacks, these grey zone attacks, they're just another weapon that countries have in terms of what's going on. Supply chain is really important. That's what Maersk was as well. It was done through an update. Again, this is a company in Greece that support a whole bunch of shipping companies. They were compromised by ransomware actor, and because of their connections with shipping companies and the ships, they were also compromised. So they use the ability to actually transit their network into these other places to actually spread it out. And that's the problem, is all these organisations are interconnected. Now we've got a short video. I'll just stop sharing for a sec about the Steno Impero. So basically what happened back in 2019, there was a Iranian ship that was seized by the British off Gibraltar, and in response the Iranians seized a British ship, the Steno Impero. See if we get the sound working.
I can play it now, Stephen, so.
Okay, play. You can pause it there, Jeroen. So what happened? This is basically the ship was transiting in national waters, and the Iranians challenged it and basically tried to get them to turn so they go into Iranian waters, but they refused it because there was a British ship there, which is the other voice you hear, telling them, no, keep going the way you're going. You're free to do that. So what then happened? So maybe just if you just stop sharing, I'll reshare my slides. What happened then was that the Iranians did GPS spoofing against the Stenden Impero, and they basically got lost and ended up turning around and going into Iranian waters. And I'll just show you. You can see sort of their track there. You can see Stenden Impero in the middle. It's just that thing on there. It's going along, doing its thing. Gets intercepted, and like all of a sudden it just does all these weird turns. So this is basically the result of GPS spoofing, which led them basically to get lost. And then they end up in Iranian waters, and the Iranians, and what you actually see in that video is the last part of what happened is the Iranians actually roping down and taking it over. So here's a classic case of them trying to use physical means to achieve their aims and then going to a cyber means. So the next one we'll just do again. So this is the HMS Defender, a Royal Navy ship. I'll just stop sharing and let Jeroen share the video. And basically they were operating in the Black Sea in 2021 before the recent war started. And basically what was happening was they were going to Odessa for a port visit, but exercising their freedom of the seas. They were intercepted by the Russian Navy, and basically they were trying to tell them to turn around. They refused. They end up going to port, and then so we'll just show you the interaction between them and the Russians first. Okay, that's enough, Jeroen. Let's pause it there. I'll just flip back to my slides. Then when the Defender went to the Odessa port, there was actually another vessel with it, a Netherlands Navy ship, the Evertsen. And basically they were sitting by a side in Odessa, and all of a sudden their AIS track showed them traveling out of the port, across the Black Sea and into Sebastopol, into the home port of the Russian Navy in the Black Sea. In fact, they hadn't moved at all. This was not a GPS spoofing, but an AIS spoofing. So basically sending a signal on behalf of these ships, making it look like they were actually traveling. And it was a provocation by Russian military intelligence, totally a provocation, which again is an example of a physical effort to try and stop them going into the waters in the Black Sea. And then when that wasn't successful or didn't achieve the aims they want, they use a cyber means. So again, it's interesting in terms of understanding cyber attacks in the maritime sector, particularly by nation states. They're trying to achieve aims that they got different means to do. So with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there's lots of activist groups involved in doing attacks against Western interests. there's one called KillNet, which is they've targeted the air traffic control system of Europe, European Parliament, all sorts of US government targets. But also they've targeted ships bringing in US ships bringing in equipment to NATO and for Ukraine. So this is a KillNet chat message where they're basically telling the people in this group to attack this particular American ship that's carrying Bradley armored fighting vehicles from Antwerp through to Bremerhaven, and these are being sent to be used in Ukraine. So the Russian military intelligence and intelligence, FSB, people like that, are operating with these hackers who are basically being tasked quite openly through this channel to actually do attacks. And they either use marine traffic description of the ship to help saying, okay, maybe we should go after the port or we should go after the ship. So very directed attacks. Recently, we have a number of ports in the Netherlands hit by DDoS attacks, and this is like a firm which looks after the port of Rotterdam. Just an alert about that. Also, the port of Quebec. You can see another message here from another group called No Name, which are also quite active, basically targeting the port of Quebec because they're sending military equipment to Ukraine. It's not just in Western Europe, in Europe. It's also in the Asia Pacific. There's been a number of advisories about Chinese Ministry of State Security and PLA units targeting the maritime sector for intelligence and for other various purposes. Obviously, and we had a speaker actually last week who's Australian but talks about the activities of China around Taiwan. A lot of stuff going on there. That grey zone activity. Also in the South China Sea, you would have seen all the Chinese Coast Guard ships running into the Philippine ships and sometimes running into each other because they get a bit confused. But there's lots of stuff happening there, and there's like all this cyber stuff happening at the same time. So I won't worry about that. As I said, the US also has conducted cyber attacks against others. In this case, it was against an Iranian spy vessel involved in identifying ships that were traveling past Yemen, and they're getting and notifying the Houthis. So the Americans actually did a cyber attack against the ship and basically knocked out all its communication. So as I said, these capabilities are available to lots of countries, and lots of countries use them. You probably would have read about this attack earlier this year on oil tankers. There was a second series of these. So this was by an Iranian anti-Iranian government group. Basically, they attacked the satellite communication of the ships, and basically they meant they couldn't operate in the Indian Ocean where they were trying to transit. And this happened again. Again, this is, I always think the anti-Iranian groups, might just be probably some part of the Israeli intelligence, but yeah, obviously there's lots of conflicts going on, and all of them have got some sort of cyber aspect typically. MSC had a recent one back in May, not that recent, but yeah, interesting one in May, GPS spoofing case, and you can see the track here, and you can see the grey bit is land, so they shouldn't be sailing over land, so they were pretty confused, and they end up running aground. So these things are happening pretty regularly. So with that, I might just throw to Jeroen to talk a bit about the HoneyNet.
We decided to build as a research group a maritime ship HoneyNet, and you can see a HoneyNet really as a decoy that you set up on the internet to attract attackers to really try to get into it, to get information about the tactics, techniques, and procedures. So. And a HoneyNet is multiple honeypots. So when we decided to work on it, and you see that in the next slide, is that we first started with a CTEL COPHAM, and it's a lot used to provide some kind of internet connection to ships at sea. And why we choose for the CTEL is that there are a lot of common vulnerabilities in those systems, from simple dealer menus that you can access. But it was also really easy to find them on Showdown, and that's on the next slide. When you search on Showdown just for cobweb, then you see different kind of systems online, and we even were able to find some of those systems that were really accessible through the internet. And then you think, okay, those kind of vulnerabilities for those kind of systems are already out there a long time, and so probably the companies already patched that, updated those systems. But what you see is that they are running a lot of old versions, and with simple credentials, you can get into the system. And when you get in, you can even find like latitude, longitude, so you can point out where the ship is. And through this kind of vulnerabilities, you can even find more information. What is its route, and so on. But you can also get into the rest of the network, into the IT and OT of a ship when there is no segmentation. So
yeah, that's important first thing to do.
So, and what we then started to do, we started with the help of our students and students of the University of Groningen, and we started to make a simple start to set up a small ship network, completely virtual. We used a lot of containerization and different tools to set up that when an attacker comes in, he really sees like a ship network, and that a ship, for example, that is sailing between between Halling and Schelling, where our Maritime Institute is, and we first wanted to model a whole ship digital in containers for an attacker to attack, but it was a complex task. So we are still building with students and with the help of students and with the help of colleagues, building on a big ship network, and the entry point for the attacker is the VSAT. And this is like how we do it at the moment. We have, when you look at number one, we have an attacker coming into the honey net, and we are trying to log all his steps. What is he doing? And from all those information, we see attacks coming in. We provide the attacker with a ship that is really sailing. So, and from that, we also present the logs, and we save everything, and we are working on multiple projects now to analyze all those data. So we have a lot of attacks to our honey net, and and the attacks are coming from all over the world. We have some hotspots. We do some analysis. We look at the common vulnerabilities they are trying to get into, what the attackers are using, and we also are looking at how they are doing it. And when you go on the next slide, you see like in a short period, we have like 5 million attacks on our honey net. A lot of common attacks, a lot of scanning going on, but we also have some attacks really looking for maritime devices. And on the next slide, we also took some simple maritime device that translates a really maritime bus system NMA into to Ethernet, and we made different attack scenarios for it, and we saw these devices really easy to find online, and we just mimic a device like this on the internet, and we saw attacks. The last thing we did with our honey net is on the next slide. We also bought a maritime Starlink device. We put it on the roof of our university. And as soon as Stephen knows the numbers better, as soon as we switched to the Starlink, the number of attacks to our devices really increased.
Yeah, so I think we had 5 million over 6 months with the previous setup, and we had 5 million in about 2 days with the Starlink.
Yeah.
So it's a significant increase in traffic.
And what you see when we switch to Starlink, Starlink is being used by a lot of companies. We even talked to a cruise company lately, and they have like 6 Starlinks in an array on the ships. to provide really bandwidth to the guests. And what we did also for the use of my PhD, of course, we wrote a lot of papers about demonstrating attacks on maritime cyber physical devices. We started with writing about the ship HoneyNet just to get it out there that we are working on it. We are the first one really thinking about building a ship HoneyNet to gain insights into the attacks going on. And we also about how you could share that cyber threat intelligence. And also we are looking for projects in the future about using all the gathered data to analyze and maybe feed into a SIEM or use for in a SOC or something. So that's about the HoneyNet.
So thanks, Jeroen. So and the thing about the HoneyNet that sort of fits, we've got the database is, to us it's a logical extension, because the database is historical incidents, in the public domain, often with not a lot of technical detail, often pretty high level. We wanted to know firstly what's happening right now, but also that really technical level. So it gives us that picture, and it's really the combination we like to use, and I think that combined information gives us a much clearer picture of what's happening in the environment. But also, it also helps us with our other work. And a lot of the important stuff we do is around actually running simulations and exercises. So we do a lot of work to scaling using the bridge simulators, and soon we're going to bring in the engine room simulators as well in simulations to develop. And by having the information on historical cases plus information from the ship HoneyNet, we are able to design those scenarios so they're quite realistic, and that really helps in terms of engaging people. I think if people, you put them through a scenario they think is impossible and never happened, it's much more difficult to engage them to take it seriously. But if you can actually, and what we often do is we'll run an exercise, and in the end we'll explain where all the different elements came from, why all of them actually happened. So this is just some photos of the facility. It's quite extensive, the actual monitoring station, so we can do a lot of monitoring of what people are doing. We've built special tools to actually run the various scenarios that work in with the systems, and we're building more and more capabilities all the time. So just to give you an example, we ran an exercise with the Netherlands Coast Guard, and basically this was with the ship here that they were put on, just as a way of showing them some of the challenges. So I'll just stop sharing, and we can just show you a quick video of that. I think it's a little bit of time yet. So basically the Coast Guard one.
Yeah. The Coast Guard one?
Yeah. So basically, they came to Terschelling, and we ran an exercise with them, and it was actually quite interesting because one of the things about the Coast Guard is they're at the end of these communications when something happens. They're the people that they're trying to call over the radio. So it was very useful for them to understand what the experience might be like, and you'll see here. So here. So I've got lots more slides, but I might just finish it there. I was just going to talk a bit about some of the other educational stuff we do, but just for the sake of, if people have got questions, we can answer them. And I already see a very good question from Eves about why the different numbers of attacks. Should we stop there, Eves, and just do questions now?
Yeah, it's okay for me. If there are any, just a reminder to the audience, if you have questions about the presentation, please drop them in the chat. I already had a question because when Jeroen was explaining the setup of the HoneyNet, the traditional setup, you see a couple of million attacks on a time frame of about 6 months, and then suddenly you activate the Starlink and you get the same number in a couple of days. So why is there a difference? Why is Starlink more popular with the hackers, or is it a system that's easier to breach?
I mean, it's obviously speculation because we're seeing this and we're thinking the same thing. Because this is a marine range that we're using for Starlink. The range we were using before wasn't anything to do with maritime, but we were just basically hoping when they got there, they thought that it was a maritime system. So I wonder, this is just a supposition, is that maritime band is actively scanned by lots of people. I think it's an interesting piece of research for us to understand. Are people actively looking at these places where they know they're going to be able to connect to ships much more than they are at other environments? But for us, the more information, the more attacks we see, the better, because obviously there is a lot of scanning, but the really good, interesting, targeted stuff where they're looking at particular systems that are only in maritime. That's where the goal is for us in terms of our research.
We also now started to build a pipeline to really analyze a lot. We have also students working on that, and we also want to share our data sets with the community so that we publish data sets that others also can analyze.
Because we've got lots of data, so we're quite open to sharing it and having public data sets. Obviously that and other people can look at them and find things. But it's an amazing source of information. But yeah, it really surprised me when that happened, that we got so much more traffic. It was just incredible.
Any other questions from the audience? I still have one. I find it interesting when you did with the exercise with the Ghost Guards, or like a couple of weeks ago with the Rijksrederij.
Yep.
These are governmental agencies who are interested to dealing with it.
Yep.
What's the reaction from the industry itself, from the ship owners and the ship operators? The feeling that I have is they're not interested. They're like, well, if it happens, well, first of all, it won't happen to me because we're a much too little player, or they don't know, they don't have the knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, as you say, like these government organisations are much more aware and concerned about cyber threats. But I think, and the nice thing about having getting the Coast Guard along, and you mentioned Rijksrederij, who we're now doing training for, is I think it shows others the importance of this work, and they've, in a way, they've done a favour to us and to the industry by being the first to do this, so to show others that there's benefit in it. So I think now we're getting a lot more interest from non-government players. We've talked to a couple of shipping companies about doing something similar for them. So I think that's coming. We just haven't started yet.
Okay. Any other questions coming out of the audience? Or comments or feedback?
There's a question there about the Stender Impera. How did the GPS spoofing on the Stender lead to the course change we saw? So basically, they were trying to travel in a certain direction, and by spoofing the GPS, they basically went the wrong way. So basically, they thought they were going on the track they wanted, according to their ECDIS, but in fact, they were going the wrong way. So basically, if you spoof the GPS, as maybe the question already knows how it works, but basically you're sending a false location to the person. So that they're constantly thinking they're one place and they're in fact somewhere else. And you can lead someone. There's a lot of research on this, that you can lead people to wherever you like if you control that. I mean, obviously, if they're looking out the window and they're seeing land where it shouldn't be, they should probably notice. But you can see how that's, and even that's interesting because you saw the other case where they ran aground. But at sea like that, it's actually quite confusing, particularly high stress situation. You think of that crew, they've just had Iranian gunboat come up to them and challenge them and tell them to turn around, and then they're trying to navigate their way out of that. The British Navy's telling them where to go. You can imagine the level of confusion.
I got a follow-up. So they thought the gyro was wrong when in fact it was a GPS problem.
Maybe,
Yeah.
and what do you trust in a situation like this?
And that's an interesting thing is we ran, and it's interesting running the exercise because you also get to see in detail the sort of confusion that goes on. We had some people, and they said they thought the radar was actually defective because the actors was telling one thing, the radar was telling something, but they immediately distrusted the radar, which is interesting, like a bit like not just in the gyro. So it's that confusion element. And if you look at maritime accidents, vessel incidents, the vast majority are human factors. So it's errors made in their decision making, and that decision making is driven by the devices they have on board that are telling them what's going on. And in effect, you don't actually have to make a ship. You know, if you want to make a ship go somewhere, or if you want to crash into something, you don't necessarily have to do that yourself. You just have to confuse the crew enough so they end up doing it, because that's the challenge. Particularly like you think of the Malacca Strait, tight ports. You think of the Suez Canal. Like how quickly could you cause a problem? Is there a follow-up question?
Yeah, they should trust the gyro rather than the GPS. No, are there some navigation equipments less prone to intrusion than others? I think the sextant is the less prone.
That's right. Anything you don't have, hasn't got power going to it, might be better. A sextant and good vision to look at the stars. And the problem is, because people would say, oh yeah, but the radar's fine, but of course the radar's actually running on a Windows 7 machine. Sure, there's an analog device connected to it, but the actual radar itself is just as vulnerable to a cyber attack as the ECDIS or anything else. And that's the problem is when you can't trust things, what do you do? And that's part of what the training's supposed to be about, is understand these are possibilities, and then when they happen, how do you respond?
Okay, well, if it runs on a Windows 7, that's very close to analog now.
Well,
another question from Peter Jan. As I understood, more than half of the attacks come in the form of ransomware, but why do you think this is so popular? Isn't it much more interesting as a hacker to jam or spoof the navigational system to remain anonymous?
I think the thing is that ransomware more widely is a huge problem. And these ransomware groups are targeting the maritime sector just like they're targeting other sectors. So that's why there's that big amount of that. That isn't necessarily the really focused stuff by nations. Well, it's not nation states. It's criminal groups. So they're looking for opportunity to make money from those activities. So I think that's why it's big. In terms of interest, I mean, it's all about what actions on objectives. What are they trying to do? What are they trying to achieve? Course of action. That's what intelligence is all about. What's the course of action of people? So what are they trying to, as you say, use jam or spoof navigation systems and not be known? I mean, for us, we like using sometimes a ransomware attack, because the great challenge is a lot of cyber attacks are not a lot of a sign of them, so you don't know they're happening. So in terms of training people and getting people's awareness, it's hard. That's not a good environment. But if they got a ransomware screen pops up, by then they've worked out there's actually something going on. So when we do run an exercise, I think we run 4 sessions usually for our training, in the first three, we don't have these sort of obvious things like a ransomware screen. But by number 4, we have a ransomware screen pop up. So then at least they get the understanding. Okay, there has been a cyber attack. If they don't get the subtlety, then they get the more obvious. But I think the reality is that ransomware attacks are just a massive problem. You know, it's just such a good business model for the criminal actors. Interestingly, we talked about NotPetya with Maersk. It was made to look like a ransomware attack, but in fact it wasn't. It was a destructive attack. So even the nation-state actors are using it as a method of tricking people that it's a different type of cyber attack.
To follow up on that question, Stefan and Jeroen, when I'm browsing through the MCAD database, indeed, there's a lot of ransomware attacks, but aren't the ransomware attacks targeting the shore-based organization, and is the ship collateral damage?
That's a good question, because there's the number of ransomware attacks actually on ships is relatively low. It's not a huge number. They have happened, and the majority are land-based organizations. And that's a typical target of these ransomware actors. So that's not surprising. Obviously, there's a collateral damage to the ships, as you say, if the shipping company or some facility on port or the chandlery or some sort of support service on land is hit by a ransomware attack, they're impacted by it. But there are specific attacks that have occurred on ships. So that's interesting for us as well, because you think about in terms of the current sort of situation with piracy and that sort of thing. In a way, there could be cyber piracy. You can rather than try and take over a ship as it's sailing past, you could do it with cyber means.
And maybe a final question to wrap it up. What do you think about rules, regulations, guidance specific for the maritime and specific for ships? Because everybody is talking about NIS2, the European regulation, but if you take a deep dive into it, you see that actually it states that individual vessels are exempt, so they don't need the same level of protection as the shore-based organizations. That means that they're sitting ducks, no?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the regulations, and that's part of the problem is one is they're way behind the reality, because the time frame it takes from them to be actually agreed and then put in place is just a very long time. And by then the threats have actually moved on, got quite more advanced. The other thing is, if it's just a compliance exercise, if organisations saying, well, ships aren't included in this, we don't have to worry about it. That mindset doesn't actually help. It's more about making people aware of the threats. Jeroen, you want to talk about some of the stuff? I know you've put some.
Yeah, no, but there is when you look at regulation resolutions and that kind of stuff, and just like Steven said, it's sometimes way behind and
incredibly high level. Incredibly high level too.
Yeah, it's a high level, and it's a lot about risks and not do risk management and that kind of work. So, but maybe it's also thinking about a reference architecture for a ship network, for example, and even on the IT and OT. But that could be more solution, because almost no ship is the same on the network level.
Okay. Let's wrap it up here, because this was mighty interesting. All right, I think that everybody's seeing my screen again. So thank you, Steven. Thank you, Jeroen, for this very interesting very informational presentation. But now announcing next week's webinar. It's a little bit out of the ordinary in the context of the upcoming ECI Bridge conference, Anchoring Cyber Resilience, Cybersecurity Strategies for a Unified Digital Europe, which will take place in Bucharest between 9th and 11th of December. The Antwerp Maritime Academy will host a roundtable on the 10th of December from 10:30 to 12 at the Beacon here in Antwerp. And it will be live streamed to the main event in Bucharest. Now, this roundtable is titled Strengthening Europe's Cybersecurity Workforce, Skills, Education and Cross-Sector Readiness. And we will actually discuss talent development and cross-sector collaboration with a focus on the maritime industry. I think if one point is made today by Stefan and by Jeroen is that there's a huge need of cybersecurity talent moving into the maritime industry. So we're going to discuss this on the roundtable next week. And the people that we invited are Noémie Honoré from Wavestone. We also asked Professor Dr. George Ataya from the Solvay Business School, David Rook, who is the CIO of Exmar, and Joost Dam, who is the CEO of Secamo, but was previously the CISO of the PSA in Antwerp. So he's also the chairman of the board of the ISAC and the Port of Antwerp, Bruges. So it's not a lunch webinar. Again, it will take place between 10:30 and 12. If you want to follow the live stream of the debate or even be part of the public in the studio, please scan the QR code and register. But keep in mind, audience seats are limited, so be very quickly. So that wraps it up for today. Many thanks to Stephen and to Jeroen for this interesting presentation and for their very insightful knowledge and expertise on maritime cybersecurity. Thank you, audience, for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next week, maybe at the roundtable live or within the audience. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.